I'm delighted to be here. Let me begin by asking you to consider what it is that drives humans of all ages to want to learn. What is it that motivates them to explore their world, to discover, and to innovate? It all begins with curiosity. Now, curiosity has been known to sometimes kill the overly curious cat, but it is an element in the learning process that is critical to motivation, focus, and retention. I'd like to introduce you to someone who exudes curiosity. We all have it, but some people seem to have more of it. This is Max Deutsch. He's a 25-year-old technological entrepreneur from San Francisco, and I recently interviewed him in my research into the role that curiosity plays in the learning process. Now, I was interested in his tech innovation. He has a number of award-winning tech programs, computer programs, and apps, but I was particularly interested in his unabashed zest for learning, and not just learning about technology, but learning about a lot of different things. In 2016, Deutsch began a challenge, an endeavor that he called Month to Master. He picked 12 extremely challenging tasks and dedicated a year to trying to develop expert-level skills in each of them. So he devoted 1 month to each task, and at the beginning of the month, he would chronicle his progress and the process he was using, and at the end of the month, he chronicled the outcome. And he usually did that in the form of a video or a picture, so he had great empirical evidence. As he was going through the process, he vowed that he was going to, number one, continue to work out regularly. Of course, he kept his full-time job. He wanted to continue to see family and friends. He even wanted to continue to meditate each morning. That was important for him. And he also wanted to get 8 hours of sleep a night. I know, it seems impossible. Let's take a look at his list. You can see that they're vastly different, but the thing they have in common is that they are just ridiculously ambitious. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each one, but I want to highlight a few of them. The first month of November, he wanted to be able to memorize a deck of cards in less than 2 minutes. Now, that seems impossible. They are randomly shuffled. Within 2 minutes, he'd know the order, and he was actually successful at this one by harnessing the amazing visual power of the mind. So he dedicated 52 spots in his childhood home. And so he thought about 52 different places that he could vividly see in order as he went through his tour. Now, if you think back to your childhood home, you could probably do that, right? Vividly envision 52 spots. And then he put a visual on each card. And for him, the most effective one was to put a face on each card. So it was either someone he knew or someone who was famous. So for example, the 4 of hearts could be his mom. The 12 of clubs, Mick Jagger. If his bed is the first spot in his house and the bookshelf in his room is the second, if the second card in the deck was his mom, he'd imagine her standing by the bookstore. Or if the second card in the deck, was the 4 of clubs, he'd imagine his mom by that bookshelf. If the second card was the 12 of clubs, he'd imagine Mick Jagger. It's a system that uses the visual powers, and again, you might be thinking, I'm heading to Vegas with that system, but remember, it's one that you could use to remember a lot of different things. In February, he wanted to land a standing backflip. He did it. The month before that, he wanted to solve a Rubik's Cube in less than 20 seconds. He not only did it, but he was able to memorize the pattern, so he actually did it behind his back in 20 seconds. In April, halfway through, he said he wanted to be able to speak a language he didn't speak, for at least be conversant at least for 30 minutes. So he picked Hebrew. And by the end of the month, he has a video of him talking to his friend Josh, who speaks Hebrew, for 30 minutes on the future of technology. Halfway through his challenges, he was 6 for 6, 100%. But the 7th month, this is the one I thought was way out there. He wanted to be able to build a self-driving car. Now, this is his area of expertise, of course, but it just seems so difficult. He actually crashed the car a few times, but by the end of the month, he was successful in writing the program. In July, his goal was to finish the Saturday night crossword puzzle, the Saturday New York Times crossword puzzle in one sitting. And this was the one he actually was getting to near the end of the month. He didn't think he was going to get through it. He couldn't use any resources, and he'd get stuck and had absolutely nowhere to go. So he had to begin studying the patterns of crossword puzzles, and he had to improve his vocabulary. He was eventually successful right at the end of the month. And interestingly, after that challenge, he wrote 2 apps that people can use to sharpen their skills for crossword puzzles. He did do the 40 pull-ups consecutively. He had to change his diet and he had to change his exercise a little bit. When he got to the 12th month, he was 100% successful. He'd been 11 for 11. But he knew that that 12th one was going to be the most challenging. I'm going to come back to that one. Let's take a look at the 2nd month of December at his self-portrait. You can see from his early picture, he's not a bad drawer, but I wouldn't say that's a realistic self-portrait. But you can see his progression through the month. He gets better and better as he goes. And by the end of the month, he literally draws a realistic self-portrait. We can definitely tell that it's him. In that second challenge, and in all of his challenges, Deutsch really leveraged technology. He scraped the internet for all the information he could find. He read what he could, he watched videos, he even consulted experts. But his go-to method as he learned the skills was trial and error. There were 2 things that drove that trial and error. One was a mindset that looked at mistakes as powerful learning tools. And the second was reflection and curiosity about the learning process itself. He thought about what he could change or do differently, and then he applied what he learned about the process to the next challenges. By the time he got to the last challenge, which was the chess match against Magnus Carlsen, he's the grandmaster champion, the world champion in chess, he knew that that might be different because he was facing someone who devoted years of his life to playing chess and practicing chess. He knew that he needed to try to develop a system that would speed up the process of learning something at an expert level. So from the very beginning, Deutsch decided to approach that challenge by trying to build an algorithm similar to what you might see in a chess game on a computer, but it would be an algorithm that humans could learn and use. Interestingly, Magnus Carlsen said that he accepted Deutsch's challenge because he too was interested in the algorithm. If we want to understand what drives people like Magnus Carlsen or Max Deutsch, we need to understand the process of learning and understand that the role that curiosity plays. Curiosity begins very early in life. Young kids have loads of curiosity. We see infants reaching for things, looking for familiar faces, listening for familiar voices. By age 1, 12 months of age, they begin this systematic pointing at things around them as they invite others to engage and share in their curiosity. When children begin to talk, we see that curiosity in their incessant question asking. Children between ages 4 and 8 ask an average of about 76 questions an hour. That's over a question a minute. And that doesn't even include questions that involve things they want or things that they need. That is only information-seeking questions. Now, the extent to which children are able to learn about the world around them and learn knowledge in their everyday lives is in part dependent upon the extent to which adults notice and detect their expressions of curiosity and respond to them. The more answers that children get to their questions, the more questions they ask, and the more knowledge they build. The more knowledge they build, the more their curiosity is heightened to learn more. So what happens when their queries go unanswered? When parents are too busy and don't respond? In time, children will begin to reciprocate that unresponsiveness. Infants are sometimes known to simply stop pointing. But on the other hand, if parents are willing to not only respond, but to actually elaborate with additional information, amazing things happen. We know that there's a positive correlation between language and cognitive development and the number of times that children get answers to their questions. Usually the questions begin lower order, what is that, or who is that? But as the exchange occurs and those rich language interactions happen, the questions build in complexity. And that's what leads to higher order thinking. As we give them answers, they begin to ask deeper questions and form deeper curiosities. The more they realize what they don't know, the more they seek it. When my education students, my graduate students, are doing research in the classroom, they'll often test a pedagogy, either a curriculum or a teaching strategy, and they'll often use a model that is a pre-post test. And they have to be very careful to guard against the mind's tendency to want to seek what it realizes it doesn't know. After that pre-test, students can sometimes begin to focus more deliberately on what is being taught and have a curiosity to learn what they now know that they didn't know. And so we might see a positive increase in academic performance, but in fact, it may not be the pedagogy at all. It might be the fact that their curiosity has been piqued. So they mitigate against it. They have to have control groups, and they have to have participants in their studies who get post-tested only. When it comes to learning difficult cognitive concepts, it's extremely important that teachers are careful not to underteach. We're not likely to be really curious about things we know absolutely nothing about. Without a foundation of knowledge, we don't even know what to ask. And at the same time, we have to be careful not to overteach. If you consider the just delightful curiosity of Max Deutsch and the power of his learner-led inquiry, it's a good reminder that learners need voice and choice in their learning. They need time to explore. They need time for trial and error, to make mistakes. They need time to fail sometimes and not give up from that. It's particularly important in the sense-making process and in that stage of learning. When I interviewed Max Deutsch, it was clear that his parents had a role in developing his curiosity and in nurturing it. But in his own words, he said that his parents were not pushy or outcome-focused. He remembers a guitar showing up in the corner of his room when he was a young man, and he said he didn't even really pick it up or play it for about a year. There were no directives that he had to practice for 30 minutes a day. When he finally picked it up, it was kind of out of his own curiosity. And one of his challenges was a guitar solo. Max Deutsch and every young child values and deserves that time for free play and exploration. And sometimes that shared exploration is extremely important as well. That shared exploration with family allows children the time to develop social curiosity, where they learn to care enough to be curious about the people around them. What are they thinking? What is she feeling? How might what I'm doing impact them? Into adulthood, Deutsch's learning process really developed a mindset where he looks at new learning as simply a data point that he connects to what he already knows. In making those connections, he's exposed to a lot of different domains, and he said that it is that connecting type of thinking that has really allowed him to make accurate predictions about the world. It's that kind of critical thinking that's so important today. In a time when performing just automated or closed skills makes it very difficult to make a living, the jobs not being replaced by computers are those that involve problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, the ability to think outside the box, and innovation. When we think of innovation, we sometimes think of it as something that's sort of exclusively done within a certain expertise. But when you think about innovation, innovation is putting together things that no one has thought to put together before. It's really different than discovery. And it requires a real T-shaped approach. If you look at the vertical part of the T, that's that deep expertise. It's our training, it's our education. It's where our deep passions and curiosities and our experiences lie. But at the horizontal crux of that T, our curiosity must lead us to learn about a lot of different things, to develop a broad base of knowledge and skills, especially transferable skills like collaboration and the ability to communicate. Within that very broad range, we must also be willing to work with a lot of different individuals and different professions and fields. It doesn't matter how deep your expertise is in technology. You're not likely going to be able to develop an app that will help someone become better at crossword puzzles if you've never done crossword puzzles, if you know nothing about them, and vice versa. And in the same respect, if you want someone who's paralyzed to be able to use that app, even though he doesn't have the use of his hands, you need to be willing to work with people from different fields, maybe an occupational therapist. Innovation begins with curiosity, and it's fed with skills and knowledge both deep and wide. Now, before I close, by finally revealing the outcome of the last challenge, which was the chess match, I'd like to quickly recap 5 things that I think are most important that we can all do to nurture curiosity in our children and in our grandchildren and in ourselves. Number 1, learn about a wide array of things and perspectives. Make connections. That will allow you to be innovative in your thinking. Number 2, make time for quiet reflection. We want to use technology. It's so critical to our learning, but we also have to be willing to unplug sometimes. Number 3, remember that knowledge feeds curiosity, and curiosity feeds knowledge. It's a reciprocal relationship, and our youngest learners are counting on all of us to fuel it. Number 4, reflect on the learning process, especially within your own personal sense-making. Think about how you best learn. When we get out of that comfort zone and we're in that grown zone where we're feeling anxiety, like we're not very good at things, that's when we have to be willing to make mistakes, maybe even fail to get to the growth zone. And lastly, don't let your perceived limitations confine your curiosity and learning. That I learned from Max Deutsch, and I'm very grateful for that. So how did he do against Magnus Carlsen in the chess match? Well, first of all, he realized that in 30 days, it was not nearly long enough to learn an algorithm. So although he spent most of the month on the algorithm, he abandoned it at the end and decided he just needed to step up to the chessboard and do his very best. Ultimately, his first 12 moves were perfect, but he lost to Magnus Carlsen, and Carlsen retained his grandmaster title. But even though Max lost, he said it was the last challenge that was his most interesting. The 12th one was the one that heightened his interest for developing the algorithm further. At the end of the match, Magnus Carlsen shook his hand and said, "I'm really curious as to how the algorithm is going to work out." Max smiled at him and said, "Well, if it works, are you up for another match?" Magnus replied, "Yes," and then he signed his chessboard with a note underneath that said, "Till next time." May your next time always be filled with curiosity. Thank you.